So you've probably heard the phrase monkey see, monkey do before, and it's probably been used in a derogatory way to say that somebody imitated something when they shouldn't have. But in actuality, as we're going to see today, that phrase shouldn't be monkey see, monkey do. It should be monkey see, monkey do, monkey learn. And if you want to know more about the power of learning by imitation, then this is the video for you, because I am Dr. Igor Yudicevich, and this is behavior modification. Let's go. Okay, so today we're going to turn our focus to social learning, basically monkey see, monkey do, but we're going to take a more in-depth look at what exactly are the aspects of social learning that we need to be aware of to maximize our ability to modify behavior. So we are going to start with the work of Albert Bandura, and we're going to turn to his social learning theory and his chapter on social learning theory for our working quote that's going to guide us in our look at social learning. So Bandura mentioned on page 22 here that human functioning would be exceedingly inefficient, not to mention dangerous, if behavior were controlled only by directly experienced consequences. So the important thing here is that human functioning would not be efficient, and it would actually be dangerous if it was only controlled by directly experienced consequences. And by logic, it's very efficient if it is not only controlled by directly experienced consequences, that is, it is controlled by observed consequences. He goes on to say that fortunately people can profit greatly from the experience of others, and that's what we're going to look at today. How are we more efficient? How do we get rid of that inefficiency and avoid that danger by not having to learn only due to directly experienced consequences? How can we learn from these indirect consequences experienced by others? So what is one way to engage in this social learning? Learning not by directly experienced consequences, by just observing experienced consequences. How exactly do we profit greatly from the experience of others? Well, that encompasses all of social learning. What we're going to dive into today is imitation. So imitation is a learned behavior where the learner replicates a modeled action. So imitation is when the learner imitates, not surprisingly, a particular modeled action. Now, that's sort of the English definition of it. For the behavior modification criteria for imitation, we need four separate things. The first thing we need is we need a modeled behavior. And this is the behavior that is going to be imitated. This serves as the antecedent to the imitation behavior. Then we need what's called formal similarity. And that is the idea that the behavior that is imitated or behavior that is produced as a result of imitation looks and sounds the same as the modeled behavior. Next criteria that we need is temporal proximity. The imitation has to occur shortly after the modeled behavior. And the last one is, and this is a very important one, model control. And that is the idea that the model is the controlling variable that causes the imitation, rather than any reinforcement history that the imitator might have had. So let's take a look at an example of this. Let's say that you're trying to learn a dance move from social media. So you're watching a social media video of somebody doing a short dance routine, and then right after watching it, you stand up and you perform the exact same movements. This would be imitation. This would qualify under behavior modification definition of what imitation is. So basically, you would have that modeled behavior in this situation as an antecedent. The social media video, that is the model, shows you the specific dance moves, and then that demonstration, those specific dance moves, is what prompts the learner to imitate. So the modeled behavior is the antecedent. The model behavior is basically the cause of the imitated behavior. Next, we have the criteria of formal similarity. In this case, the learner replicates the same body movements, the same hand movements, the same gestures, the same sequence that they observed in the video. So the dance that they perform looks like the dance that they watched on the video. Next one, we have the criteria of temporal proximity getting satisfied. So the imitation occurs immediately or very shortly after the video ends. So typically when you watch a video and you're going to imitate the dance moves in that video, you don't watch the video, put your phone away, come back 20 minutes later, and then try the dance moves. Typically, if it's imitation, it's going to happen immediately after. Actually, by definition, has to happen immediately or very shortly after the modeled behavior. And then finally, and this is the important one, is the model control. So the model is the controlling variable for the imitated behavior. So in this case, the behavior gets produced, that particular dance gets produced, and the student, importantly, has never done that dance before, has never been reinforced for those specific moves before. There's no reinforcement history that is a controlling factor in producing that dance moves. They perform the behavior because they saw it modeled. The modeling of the behavior is the controlling variable. It is the functional control. The imitation occurs because the behavior was modeled. So that's very important. It's not occurring because they were previously reinforced for producing that behavior. And that's what makes it true imitation. And this is one of the reasons why imitation is often the way that new behaviors are learned, because the model causes you to do the behavior, and then later the behavior might get reinforced. Your friends might see you doing the dance and they might say, wow, that is a really cool dance. But importantly, the imitated behavior as it first occurs is not due to reinforcement. It's due to the modeled behavior. That's called model control. The model behavior is the controlling factor. All right, so there are two types of models that are important in imitation and imitation behavior, and these are known as planned models and unplanned models. So a planned model is something like a live demonstration or video. This is a model that is producing their behavior intentionally to be imitated. It's a model that's planned. It's planned for imitation. So a great example of this would be something like a makeup tutorial. People create the makeup tutorial specifically to teach people how to do makeup. They do the makeup tutorial hoping that other people will imitate their modeled behavior and be able to do their makeup and look snatched and look fabulous. In that case, this is a planned model. This is the first type of model where it's an intentional model. The behavior of the model is intentional. It's geared towards imitation. The other type of a model, not surprisingly, is your unplanned models. And these are where there's natural demonstrations or naturally observed behavior in daily life. And then the learner, the imitator, will imitate that behavior, but the model never intended it for imitation. So for example, if somebody's on the basketball court and they're just playing basketball and they're just practicing different moves and different shots and different plays, somebody might see that and say, oh, wow, I'm going to imitate that. I like that behavior. I'm going to imitate that behavior. However, this is an unplanned model because the intention of this person was not for the behavior to be imitated. It was simply them doing the behavior in a natural setting. And incidentally, this is the argument that celebrities often make when they indicate that, well, I'm not a role model. I never intended to be a role model. I can't, you can't hold me responsible for being a role model. Basically, what they're saying is that, hey, you guys are telling me that I'm a planned model where my behavior was intended for imitation, but in actuality, I'm an unplanned model and my behaviors are not intended for imitation. Now, notice that both of those can be imitated. So the types of models that can lead to imitation are the planned models, those ones intended for imitation, and also the unplanned models, those ones that are just naturally occurring behaviors. All right, so there are some key components for imitation. So there are some things that need to occur in order for imitation to occur. So the first thing is that formal similarity. So the formal similarity is what ensures that the model and the response, the imitation, share the same behavior topography. They share the same behavior shape and behavior form. So it's the same gesture, it's the same word, or it's the same way of brushing your teeth that the model is doing. So that's the formal similarity. We touched on the idea of this before. There's the temporal relation. So the delay between the modeled behavior and the imitated behavior needs to be short. If it's delayed, that's not considered true imitation. So in this case, the imitated behavior is actually occurring at exactly the same time as the modeled behavior. The daughter is brushing her teeth and imitating the father at exactly the same time. It would not be considered, again, true imitation if she observed her father brushing his teeth in the morning and then later that night she decided she was going to brush her teeth as well. That, again, seems to our kind of layperson language, English language understanding of imitation, you would say, oh yeah, that fits the bill of imitation. But importantly, for behavior modification, that temporal relation cannot be very delayed. And then finally, we have that controlling relation again, that's crucial, that the behavior is evoked not by the model, not by reinforcement, but by the model. So in this case, the imitation of the brushing of the teeth has to be evoked by the observing of the father, by the modeled behavior of brushing their teeth, and not from prior reinforcement history. Now, as the behavior is acquired, as the imitation occurs, it can then get reinforced to strengthen the behavior. So once the child starts brushing their teeth, you can then say, oh, wow, great job. Doesn't your breath smell wonderful? Oh, your teeth look so clean. Your smile is so amazing. But importantly, the initial cause of that behavior was not reinforcement. It was the modeling, the imitation of that modeled behavior. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to cover today in modeling and imitation behavior is what do you do if somebody just doesn't imitate? So imitation is something that comes naturally to most individuals. Most typically functioning individuals do have some capacity for imitation and will naturally do imitation of a model in a variety of different contexts. But sometimes you come up against a situation where individuals just don't imitate. And as we've mentioned, imitation is a very efficient and not dangerous way to learn a behavior. So we don't want to lose that if somebody just because of certain circumstances naturally doesn't imitate others. So again, what if somebody just doesn't imitate, such as this child that is just playing alone, spinning alone, not imitating anybody else? In that case, what you can do is you can do imitation training. And this is a process where a learner who lacks spontaneous imitation learns to do imitation. So the training includes modeling combined with a do this cue. So you would model behavior and then you would indicate with a prompt, do this. This is time to repeat the behavior. You can use physical prompts that are then faded over time. You can use reinforcement for closer approximations to imitations, and that is known as shaping. And your goal is this generalized imitation where you can perform these untrained new imitative behaviors in new contexts. So this process was developed in part from research by Baer, Peterson, and Sherman. And they had a study where they taught imitation to children with profound mental impairments who did not exhibit imitative behavior. So these children did not naturally imitate. And basically what they did is they taught these individuals to emit simple responses when the experimenter presented a verbal response cue of do this, and then provided the model. So they were basically reinforced when the observer said, hey, do this, and then lifted their left hand. They were reinforced if they also lifted their left hand. If they said, do this, and they touched their right ear, they were also reinforced if they touched their right ear. So they would use social reinforcement, such as the word good. They would use small bits of food as reinforcement, and they would shape closer and closer the similarity of the imitated response to the modeled response. So if they said, raise their hand, and they go, do this, and the child only raised their hand this high, they would get reinforced, but next time they would have to raise it higher. And the time after that, a little bit higher. And they would shape that closer approximation to an imitation of the actual model. So what happened using this procedure? So we're going to take a look at the results here. And we are going to focus here. There was 3 subjects. We're going to focus here on subject number 1. They tell one of the clearest stories here. So on the x-axis here, we have the blocks of 10 responses. So these were blocks of 10 modeling trials where they would provide a behavior for the child to model, and then they would record whether the child modeled the behavior or not. And if they did model the behavior or they came to an approximation of the behavior, they get reinforced. If they didn't model the behavior, no reinforcement. So we have blocks of 10 responses. So they would take the average of 10 responses and plot that on the graph. That's on the x-axis. Basically, left side is early in the treatment, Right side is later on in the treatment. Then on the y-axis here, we have the percent new responses correct on first demonstration. So what they would do is they would give the child number one here, they would give them a behavior to model for the first time. This child had never been asked to model this behavior before, and they would see if they could produce it on the first attempt. So if they raised their hand and they said, do this, and that was the first time they asked a child to raise their hand, they would see if the child would also raise their hand. If they touched their nose and said, do this, and the child could touch their nose, then they would record that as a successful imitation. And again, importantly, these behaviors were never taught to the child before. So the child could perform all of these behaviors. They were within their repertoire, but they were never modeled to the child before. And then you can see there on that y-axis, we have the percent of new responses correct on the first demonstration, and it goes all the way from 0. The child did not get any of the 10 trials in that block correct, all the way up to 100%. The child got all 10 out of 10 correct in that particular block. So what do we see? What occurs as this child goes through training? Well, importantly, in the beginning, they did not imitate very much at all. You can see that in this case, imitation was at 10%. So only 1 out of every 10 movements followed by do this were imitated by the child. However, after reinforcing imitation in the later blocks, this is about 130 trials later, so it did take a lot of time to learn, but importantly, imitation was learned. So imitation is an operant behavior in and of itself that allows you to learn other behaviors, but that ability to imitate is actually something that can be trained, it's something that can be learned, and this opens up this learning technique, this very efficient and non-dangerous learning technique for these children who don't naturally learn from other people's experiences and now have been taught to learn from other people's experience. So this study demonstrated that you can learn to learn, and fewer trials were needed in order to learn that response correctly over time. And then also follow-up trials revealed that this learning can be maintained, but reinforcement for imitation needs to be maintained as well. But importantly, you can learn to learn, you can learn to imitate, and importantly for these individuals, now they had opened up their learning ability by now being able to do imitation. Basically, they could now see, they could do, and importantly, they can learn. All right, so that's what I wanted to cover for today. So today we took a look at what imitation is. We talked about the 4 defining criteria of imitation for behavior modification, which is the modeled behavior, formal similarity, temporal proximity, and very importantly, model control. We took a look at the 2 types of models, planned models versus unplanned models. And then finally, we took a look at a study on imitation training to see if you can actually train imitation, which you can. And this was where Baer, Peterson, and Sherman taught that imitation to children with these profound intellectual deficits. And they went from not exhibiting imitative behavior to exhibiting imitative behavior on almost 100% of trials. So next time, we're going to continue our look at social learning by taking a look at the flip side of imitation, which is modeling. So if you ever wanted to know how to strut on the catwalks of Milan, wait a second, no, not that modeling. If you ever wanted to know how to influence others simply by performing your own behavior, then that next video is for you. But until then, stay frosty, stay functional, and go modify some behavior. So you might have heard the phrase monkey see, monkey do. And if it was told to you, it was probably when you made a mistake and copied somebody and ended up in a thing that you shouldn't be copying. And I'm going to start that again.